don't know if it's working. No, it's good. Okay, well, guess we'll just get going. How's it going this morning? Been good?
Good.
Good.
So, it's gonna get cool tonight. I bought okra the other day. I haven't planted it yet. I'm thinking put it in the garage tonight. Supposed to get.
Did you buy plants or seeds?
I bought the plants.
Yeah, I just put it in there.
Yeah.
I've got some outside planted already because it was warm. So, but we'll see.
Exactly. I was just afraid that the ground had probably cooled, too much with this, or might cool too much. So I thought I'd just wait and put it.
I think this is probably gonna be the last cool spell we see. At least I would think. But I'm not complaining about it. It feels great outside today.
It does.
So, all right. So today we're going to talk about pollinators. We're going to start out just talking about why we would want a pollinator garden. Not everybody is interested in growing just vegetables and fruits. Some people are only interested in ornamentals. But whether you are interested in edibles, having a pollinator garden or a section or multiple sections, a pollinator-related plants is going to assist you in growing fruit, but at the same time, it just really brings color, beauty, and at the end of the day, it's beneficial for the environment, which is important, and it allows us to help support nature essentially by providing host plants and providing food sources for other resources out there. So pollinator gardens, they're really not a lot different than our vegetable gardens in some of the most common basic needs. They're going to need full sun. Flowers are going to need to photosynthesize a lot, those plants, in order to be able to get enough energy to, in turn, make flowers. But they're going to provide color all year round. So essentially, we're trying to mimic nature by installing a pollinator garden. So we don't want to have something that flowers just all at once. We want to make our selections to cover a wide array of different pollinators and different bloom times. We're going to talk a little bit about that as we go. But we need full sun, 6 to 8 hours. For me, ideally, I'm going to choose like morning to midday or early afternoon sun, because the hot afternoon sun here, if we don't have our selection right, we don't pick drought-tolerant varieties, then we're really going to struggle to keep them watered and keep them happy as we go. We want to make sure that we have excellent drainage. A lot of flowers tend to be more susceptible to disease, to root rot. They're often more tender plants depending on what we're choosing. So we want to make sure that we don't plant them in a low area or areas that are going to stay extra saturated. And, for me, I always would say starting small with a pollinator garden, because you can always grow it. You can always expand it. It doesn't have to be this massive area. You don't need to scatter a whole pound of flower seeds out there, wildflower seeds or pollinator, variety mixes, just to get what you want. The goal here is to kind of give you some tips to essentially create something that looks nice, so it has aesthetics, but it also is very functional. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we plant in clusters. If we only plant like one or two of a particular species of plant, we're not really doing a whole lot. While it's going to provide some resources, it might not provide enough for a group of pollinators. If every single one of these things in this example here may cater to different species, and you're going to have species crossover. So you're going to have bees or bumblebees that are going to pollinate on different types of flowers, but you may have things like hummingbirds or certain types of moths that are going to only feed on tubular flowers. So they're going to be a little bit different. So we want to make sure that we're supplying clusters of each different type of plant so that we're having a plentiful amount. So usually anywhere from 3 to 7 plants, 5 to 7 would be ideal. 5 to me is kind of a magic number just because you got to think about like what's it going to cost to get all these things, because not all these things are easily grown by seed. A lot of flowers take stratification. They take cold weather in order to be able to germinate, and things like that we'll talk a little bit about, like even like bluebonnets can be effective pollinator plants, but those have got to be stratified and they've got to be planted in the fall in order to germinate for the April bloom time that everybody loves. So if you're doing this, a lot of people are going to be buying plants. So it can get kind of costly, so starting out small really is ideal. But we want to avoid like scattering individual species, like ones here, here, and here. You want to put them in those groups, but you do want to scatter those groups. If you have a big enough area, you may have a grouping of one species here, and we may have another over here. And you can see, you know, these little letters on this example that I found last night. You have repetition throughout the whole bed, and it really depends on the size. So if you are starting out small, you might not have repetition, and that's okay. But depending on the footprint that you're trying to create, you can definitely repeat. Another thing that I thought about this morning as I was kind of preparing for this a little more, you know, you look like here, this example has trees. Creating a pollinator garden around something like a citrus tree is really beneficial. The citrus tree in Southeast Texas is home to the giant swallowtail butterfly. That's the host plant. The worms or caterpillars, they disguise themselves almost like bird poop. And people are like, oh, they're eating my citrus leaves. But at the same time, we're cultivating a very beneficial pollinator. So we can take and we can create these types of environments around larger staples. We can do this in a traditional landscaping where we may have a flowering or even a non-flowering shrub or tree. We can create these things around the base as an understory. So you can put pollinator plants in a lot of different places. And it's kind of unique if you have a full sun area, placing them under the canopy of something similar like a small tree could be beneficial for sun shelter. Eliminating some of that hot afternoon sun that's going to stress virtually every plant in existence here. So it'll help you out a little bit with watering and just general maintenance and care.
Should you try to have red for the hummers or in your bed?
I think you should have a wide array. Red for sure, because they are attracted to red, we know. But I definitely think it comes down more to what we're going to talk about a little later, and that's like shape. Because not every pollinator, whether it's a wildlife or like a bat or a hummingbird or insects, not all of them can use every type of flower efficiently. So the next thing I want to talk about is layering. So when we're going in and we're planting these plants, we need to consider the mature size. And in order to use our space effectively, we want to layer in plants. I take this same approach to vegetable gardening because I can maximize my space. I can cram a lot more stuff in a smaller space by knowing that I can put tall things in the center of, maybe if you have an island bed where you can reach all sides, we can plant tall things in the middle, we can plant medium things around, and we can plant ground cover or lower lying plants on the outer edges. In an example like this, maybe something that backs up to a fence or something where you only have access from a couple sides, then we will go tall in the back, medium in the middle, lower in the front. So we can still achieve those groupings. It's not the best example, but this is the best I could find that would show like layering that made sense. But we can create those same groupings as in the other example. And the other example shows it as well. You've got tall, medium, and small. So it makes it a lot more manageable. And then you can actually maintain, especially if some of these items require deadheading. And it's also going to improve visibility because at the end of the day, if we have tall plants in front of medium or lower plants, then we can't see them. And you know, some pollinators are going to find their resources by sight, others by smell. So we do have to consider that vision is important even for insects and other types of pollinators. So tiering, visibility, it's also going to improve growth because if we throw up, that's one thing that I would say, like if I would say as a downfall, if you go out and you buy like a shaker can of pollinator seeds and you shake it out, you don't really have any control about what is going to grow where. So depending on what comes out and germinates in locations, you may outshade things and they may not flower or bloom as much as they could because they're shaded or not getting enough sun.
Those almost really need to be in a field.
Yeah, you know.
Or someplace that you're not looking at the aesthetics of it.
Yep, or someplace that's going to get like sun no matter what direction. You know, there's no chance of blockage. But a lot of people do like those because they're easy, you know. We also want to consider planting in drifts. So what I mean by drifts is like thinking about nature. You know, as we put these things in here, I'm talking about like curating like height and it looks like very manicured, but we can also plant in an area where we have flows. So think of like a wave. You can plant a pocket of tall things in the back. You can have some medium things weave around it. And maybe you only have medium in the back. Kind of like here, you can see in the center where this little walk path is, they've kind of just created like this flow and they're keeping all the tall plants in the very back. So it's just a way that you can mimic nature and you can create something that is more natural.
But you're still planting clumps.
Still planting in clumps of 5 to 7 plants, ideally. But you're creating something that looks more natural. You know, I would say honestly, like this is like somewhat natural, but all these things sticking right here together, that's not, you know, ideally there's going to be some space in between these. They don't have to be like super tight. Even when we go back here, this is more of a great example because you can see it's just kind of, it's in blocks, but there's a little bit of flow of some of the ground cover type flowers that are happening here.
If you think back to the English looking gardens, what they do the clumps, and so you got it.
You know, because if you plant in drifts like two or just like a natural a flow, it's going to be easier to repeat plant types. You can create some symmetry that way even if you want, because you can set certain things as anchor points and work around. You know, because some people, symmetry is like, that's just the way their brain works. Like you want it to look the same, and that's no problem. But it does create more visual impact. So if you are doing a pollinator garden or going like for more of a cottage look that's kind of natural, you are going to create more of a visual impact by doing this, because if it looks natural, it resonates more. So next we need to make sure in this mix of plants, we need to mix up bloom times. We've got to have things that bloom all season long. And we know, seasons change here, and not everything thrives in every season, and not everything blooms year round. So we need to make sure that we have ideally something that's going to bloom all the time. we can achieve that in some simple ways by maybe using some native flowering plants that are going to bloom all spring and summer. A good example would be like the native lantana. It's going to bloom all season long. It's not going to bloom in the winter. So, but we do need something in that winter time in order to keep our pollinator garden going, because there are things that can handle some of the cool temperatures. If we have early, mid, and late season bloomers, we're going to ensure we have continuous food. And just like us, if we didn't have continuous food, what's going to happen? We're not going to do too well. So ensuring that our pollinators have nectar and pollen consistently to meet their needs is important. I mean, we also have to combine that, just because it flowers at this time doesn't mean that it can support the pollinator that we're trying to attract. So as we get in a little farther, we'll see what else we need to look for.
Well, so many people here do a fall garden, and so you need those bees.
Yeah, and you need fall flowers, even if they're just annuals,
right,
to bring in. And a lot of times here it's so warm into the fall, a lot of your spring and summer stuff is still going to be blooming into that season. So we are lucky in that aspect that we do get late season blooms on things that other people characteristically might not. We're preventing seasonal gaps. I'm seeing it a lot right now, just like online groups and stuff. Everybody's complaining about pollinators. If I'm being truthful, I've got all kinds of flowers at my house right now. The pollinator abundance is just not really there right now. So even though, and I've planted more flowers than ever before this year, and I'm still not seeing a lot. But that's just how it goes. And but again, I will say too, the things that you have to consider, we could plant all these things, and one of the reasons why maybe I'm not getting a lot of pollinators is because the nectar and the pollen are not really prominent, because what's been happening environmentally lately?
So are you planting a variety or just the same flower?
I'm planting groups of the same flower, so like a group of like 3 to 5, maybe 7, depending on the space of a given flower, and I'm planting a section with different things with different shapes and colors. So, but it's been really, really dry right now, and if you think to just like honeybee, if you've ever messed with honeybees, honey production is very widely influenced on rainfall. If we get excess rainfall, it washes pollen out. Nectar flow is not really good. If it's really dry, then there's not enough moisture content consistently, so your plant doesn't form a lot of sugars or pollens. So it could be a huge reason why right now we're seeing a lack of pollinators in most people's places.
Do the temps, you think, have anything to do with it as well? I mean, we got close to 90 for a couple of days, and then we dropped back down.
I think overall, maybe not. To an extent, because it's been consistently warm, and most of your pollinators like the warm temperatures. And you think like a honeybee hive is consistently, I think, 95 degrees inside. Yeah. They regulate it like we do with air conditioner. It's cool to think about. So one of the most important things to factor in is that we have to have different shapes of flowers, because not every pollinator can effectively use every shape of flower. So hummingbirds, even bats that have long snouts, or hummingbirds have a long beak. Certain types of moths, like I know this is a sore subject that I love to talk about. The sphinx moth, which is the size of a hummingbird, comes from the tobacco hornworm or the tomato hornworm. Everybody hates those caterpillars, but they are very efficient nighttime pollinators. They pollinate nighttime plants, but they need a lot of tubular flowers. So if we only have like small open-faced flowers, we're not diversifying what is out there for these pollinators. So we have to think about, we're not going to get into too technical, like nobody's going to get out there and get a zoom-in picture of the mouth parts of a honeybee, but a lot of them have little probes where they reach in and they can feed on those sugars. So we have to have different ways for those to get them, and that's why we want to plant blocks of different colors. Different flowers have different scents. Insects find flowers by smell. Even if we can't smell it, it doesn't mean something is not out there. When you walk up, like mint, for example, is good at attracting a lot of pollinators and predators, but until you rub it, you don't really smell it. But those flowers do have a scent that's more apt to be smelt by insects. Different pollen and nectar amounts. One of the biggest reasons why you need diversification in this in a pollinator garden is because not every insect can use every type of pollen or nectar. A simple example that we all are familiar with in Southeast Texas, what's the most hated pollen season in Southeast Texas? What's the number one pollen producer? Pine pollen. Pine pollen is abundant. It's everywhere. It's covering your car. It's covering everything in existence. A honeybee can't use that. It's not useful to them at all. So here's an abundant source that might be useful to something, but it's not useful to the honeybee because that particular pollen source does not have enough protein for them. So just like us, we have different dietary needs. So do insects or pollinators. So having that diversification is going to allow us to have a better chance to feed the needs of these different insects. So we're going to look at a couple different types of flowers and their shapes and what they might attract. So great options for here is the cone flower or your black-eyed Susan, the rudbeckia. Even coreopsis, they have that kind of open-faced flower, and they have all the big center. It's an easy place for bees, butterflies to land on to get nectar and pollen. It's pretty accessible to a wide array of insects, and it makes it really, really approachable.
Do the zinnias fall in that?
Yep.
group?
Yeah, just like that flat, open shape. It doesn't necessarily have to be. It doesn't have to have like the domed center,
Okay.
but something that's
So
just
daisies would fall in there.
yeah. Even they're most of those are going to be pretty similar. Next, we'll have tube flowers. Tube flowers can fall on things like salvia. Salvia is super popular, like the blue mealy sage is a Texas native. Everybody loves the mystic spire because it's, and the cool thing about salvia and one why I recommend it a lot is because it's drought tolerant. Once it gets established, it's going to be pretty drought tolerant. It's not going to need a lot of watering. It blooms all season long and very abundantly. It will attract bumblebees and bees very prominently, but it's also one that can attract hummingbirds because it has that tubular flower. They're looking where they can stick in, their beak and they can get that nectar out of there. And it's accessible. Not all other insects are going to easily be able to get that. The native Turk's cap is one that has that same kind of flower. That's really, really easy. Turk's cap it's pretty much, it'll die back in the winter, but it's pretty invincible. It's a beautiful plant. There's red is the typical color, and there is a pink version as well. I've never seen the pink version in bloom, but
I had one that I had gotten at the Master Gardener sale 2 years ago, and it's a beautiful pink.
Yeah.
But it wasn't labeled pink. It just came up.
Yeah, those two plants to me are, and that style of flower, they're very, very easy. Even bee balm is going to have that kind of tubular flower. A bee balm's another one that's really, really easy to grow and have out there. The nectar is deep inside the flower, so it makes it really, really attractive to butterflies, hummingbirds, and any other insect that can get in there to get that. And some of them you can see, like the salvia, oftentimes the salvia doesn't have a real long flower. Some of the things out there, they may have a longer flower and a deeper kind of tube, so not everything will get every type of tubular flower. Next we got composite flowers. So what's a composite flower? A composite flower is very unique. We look like lantana is my favorite example. So one head that we would consider a flower is made up of many flowers. So those composite flowers like asters in the fall time, everybody hates goldenrod because it's very pollen heavy, it's allergy prone, but it's one of the reasons why honey works so well for allergies, because goldenrod is typically what the native honeybee finds most of their resources for in the fall here. But you have all those little pieces that look like one flower. It's made up of many flowers, so there's far more pollen and nectar. It's in smaller quantities, but you have a lot. It's just essentially like you're magnifying the options out there as far as how many flowers you have, where some of your other flowers may only bloom 2, 3 at a time. And then here you're going to have potentially hundreds of little mini flowers out there.
So does the lantana color matter? Because I know probably the best is the one when I was a kid that my grandmother grew, which was like a multicolored one. But now they've got the ones that are just the pastels, and then they're
Yeah.
Does the color really
I don't think it really matters overall. Like, I mean, ideally, if you can, native lantana would be better. But
it'll come back.
yeah, I mean,
Most
all of them will come back because they all have like the same traits of being like drought tolerant. They're going to be cold tolerant. They're going to die back to the root, and they're going to come back. But the native varieties are going to be more prone to support the needs of native pollinators, or things that are more prone to be here that may not be somewhere else. Your composite flowers have really high nectar production, so that's really, really important. Do you have a question?
I was going to ask you about, besides the lantana, what's another composite flowering plants that you...
Aster, which is more of a fall type item, and then your goldenrod. Not a lot of people plant goldenrod. Goldenrod natively comes up here. Basically any flower that's going to have just clusters, small clusters. I won't lie to you, I am not the most diverse flower savvy person out there. I have my likes and things that I love. I mostly piddle with the vegetables, but I always plant stuff. And that's one of the reasons why we did this class, because I got to learn more. So, just like everybody else.
So could we could put vegetables in a pollinator bed?
Absolutely. It kind of brings me to my next point, and that's like cluster flowers. So cluster flowers are typically going to be they're singular flowers, but they look like, sometimes they look like one big, and you see that really, really commonly on herbs. And I genuinely believe if you're going to plant a pollinator garden, you're doing yourself an injustice if you don't include herbs in there. Because number one, your pollinator garden becomes productive for edible or culinary uses, but your pollinator garden also brings in predators, beneficial predators, to help regulate the ecosystem. We can produce all the pollinators we want, but it's an abundance of anything is never good. You want balance. So you also will miss out. A lot of these pollinators have native host plants. So your dill and parsley is the host plant specifically for your eastern swallowtail butterfly. So you see here, you've got your striped caterpillars. We have one dill plant. It's not in necessarily a pollinator bed, but our stuff is really, really close together in a sense. We're on, I think, year 2.5 of the same plant. It's been stripped to the ground before, and it just keeps growing back. And I protect it from the winter a little bit with a cloth, but I keep this same plant, and it just keeps flourishing. And right now, I let it flower. And I'll cut the flower stalks off so that way I'm attracting pollinators. But I'm letting it be abundant, because not only in a pollinator garden do we need to focus on nectar and pollen, we need to focus on host plants. We need something that is going to help create the actual pollinator. And we can do that by having, we can have things like milkweed. Everybody loves milkweed because of the monarchs. So we're supporting a migratory pollinator that is going to stop here, but we've got to make sure we have the right host species. So herbs, parsley, dill, fennel can definitely help with the swallowtail butterflies. and we're also supporting beneficial insects, which I find, for me, herbs are one of the main reasons why I feel that I'm able to be primarily pesticide free in our garden. Every kind. We have parsley, we've got dill, we have one that I would highly recommend that you plant as a staple. It's kind of in the salvia family, pineapple sage. Pineapple sage makes great tea. It gives you those tubular red flowers. It will definitely get hummingbirds, and it will definitely attract tons of bees. That was our number one pollinator magnet outside of the dill plant last year, was pineapple sage. And it can be an annual, so if you don't protect it in the winter, it could die back. Ours, it was right next to our dill, and so it kind of got the same protection, and it died all the way back to the ground, and it's grown back now, and it's already established flowering far earlier in the season than when we start over. That's one. You only need one of those guys, honestly, depending on your space, because like my one dill plant, I don't need a cluster of dill because it's so big. That one plant is because it's creating a ton of flowers, and the pineapple sage is almost woody when it establishes, so it kind of grows out like a little mini shrub. So I don't necessarily need a ton of those like I might need in other things. So some plants that I would that you could use, maybe not necessarily in clusters, but I think are very important. The Turk's cap, which we talked about. One Turk's cap can get pretty decent size, so it's not one you're going to plant a bunch of in a cluster. But
there's two different ones. There's the giant,
yep,
which is literally a bush,
mm-hmm.
and 6 foot tall.
Yep, you get big.
And then the other.
There is I think a smaller variety. One of my favorite, and for us, we don't get the flowering aspect of it, and it's not a plant for everybody, but your purple passion vine, specifically your purple. While it's an invasive plant, in a sense, it will drop seeds everywhere. Even if it doesn't flower, it will come up magically everywhere. But it is the host plant for a native pollinator, and that's the Gulf fritillary caterpillar and butterfly. We've had one for 4 years now, and we keep it real small. It's flowered a couple times, but we get a lot of shade, so we don't get a lot of sun, and I think that's why we don't get a lot of flowers. But when we do get caterpillars on it, it is a crazy amount of caterpillars, and they look scary. They have big spikes on them, and they look like they would be hard, but they're actually soft. They look mean to deter predators, and we've been able to see a lot of those like go through the full cycle, kind of like a monarch, and then they're out there pollinating all kinds of other stuff in the garden.
They need something to climb on, and they need to be where you don't want them.
Yep.
With everything else.
So we actually have it planted in the middle of a vegetable bed, which is crazy. We keep it on an obelisk, and it will pop up. But we keep it trimmed. It does better if I have a taller place for it to go. But the last couple years, we've tried to keep it trimmed. To see your face back there. Well, it's on the edge, but it's in the middle of the garden. But it will pop up in all kinds of beds, and we're out in the garden a lot, so as we see new shoots come up, we just like wiggle them and we pull them up, and then it's not a big deal. It's no different to me than pulling a weed. I'd rather pull those than weeds. Coreopsis is a good one as an open-faced pollinator that does really well here. It'll bloom all summer, and it is pretty drought tolerant once you get it established. It's a good low-lying plant, so it makes really good borders, and it's something that you can include into even raised beds if you had. We mentioned herbs. Another underrated item that you can do, if you like to plant bluebonnets actually are a very early season nectar producer. So if you can be planting bluebonnet seeds or have an established bed of them in the fall, and as they stratify and go through the cold process, you're going to get those early blooms as we move into April, and they actually do provide a lot of resources for pollinators. So it's something that people love, but they don't think about it as necessarily a pollinator attractor. If we can go with native options when we're exploring some of these things like native lantana, Turk's cap, if you maybe you don't want to have like the cottagey feel of like a pollinator garden. Maybe you want to have landscape plants that can benefit. That's like your lantana, is great. As my landscape company moves into just everybody wants low or no maintenance, which there's really no low is about the closest you get to no, but native plants are that's how you achieve that. But you can do that by using some of those salvias. So you can use things in ornamental beds. Maybe you don't want that look, but you want to have pollinators all around your property. You can be planting some of that mealy blue sage. The red yucca is a native. The red yucca is really good for hummingbirds because it's got that tubular flower, and they're absolutely carefree from them. Very rarely do they need water. They're drought tolerant. So a lot of these plants will give you ease of use, but you can put them in places that that are not necessarily dedicated pollinator sections. So you can always keep that in mind. Even the Texas sage, as a shrub, it's not the most beneficial nectar producer, but it is something that you can have as a landscape plant that will provide some pollinator benefits, but without taking up a bunch of resources.
That's the one that they say blooms when it's going to rain.
It's got that silvery foliage.
Yes.
And there's even a new variety. If you don't like the lavender color flower, they actually have, I think it's called the Snow White Texas sage. It's actually a white bloom Texas sage. Really, really unique. But if we can have native plants or native options and maybe that's not solely what we have, but when we're as growers and gardeners, we have a responsibility to conserve water, to conserve resources, to limit our inputs into the soil so that we're building healthy soil and we're building a good environment. So native plants are going to thrive with less water. They're typically going to thrive with less fertilizer or inputs because they can handle the poor soil conditions. And they're going to have stronger pollinator support because native plants are going to cater to native species of animals and pollinators that are already here. One of the things that we can do in creating a pollinator garden, I'm going to flip way back here. Back here, you see they have like creating environments. So if we want to have pollinators too, we want to have a pollinator garden, we need to create shelters. If we have places for insects to harbor, then we're going to have more abundant pollinators. It's just like when we talk about, like people always want ladybugs in the garden to take care of insect problems. But if they don't have water, if they don't have shelter or places for them to actually, get the main things that are needed for all life forms, then they're not going to stick around. So, insect hotels, different shapes and things. That's decomposers are going to live in there. Mason bees or solitary bees, they actually are far more efficient pollinators than even the imported honeybee. So you can have a whole colony of honeybees, but you could have one or two independent bees or solitary bees that do better pollination than a group of honeybees. So we found that we attracted, we put our bamboo stakes in, and a couple years ago we started seeing solitary bees. They would actually get in the top of the bamboo stake and they would finish like cleaning it out, and they would make their home in the top of the bamboo stake. And we'd see them coming in and out, flying around the garden. So it really was a proving point, even though we weren't trying, that creating those environments keeps things in your locale.
When we visited the Galveston County Master Gardeners, in their pollinator bed, when they cut their bamboo back, they keep the bamboo, they'll cut it about this long, and they just lay it in clumps, or in like a pile of all over, because that's the bees will go in and.
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to have some fancy like hotel looking thing, you just need natural. And to me, if it looks more natural, like ours, it's just leaning, and it was just right for them, and they almost inhabited every one of them. And so creating places that are going to provide shelter. Another thing that we find and that we do personally at our place is we create a water source for pollinators. So creating a shallow dish We'll put different size rocks in it so that we can have places for honeybees, butterflies to land and get moisture. Even things like wasps that we give like that negative, they're not viewed as a positive thing. They're predators. They're actually pollinators. They will be attracted. You try to kill them all? We've actually, strangely enough, like I used to always want to kill them because we have a small kid running around, you know, and I'm always worried they're gonna get him. But like we actually like coexist in our front yard. We have one. I've got this pagoda statue. Every year one forms on the top of the pagoda. Every year one forms in the middle of my passion vine. And I don't worry about it because like as long as we don't get in there and bother them, like they're sheltered. We're out doing our thing. I can even trim on the plant. They don't care. As long as we're not threatening them, then they're fine. And we'll actually see them go out and they'll be a control for worms. I'll see them feeding on worms. I'll see them pollinating on certain things. So, you know, now if it's like in a high traffic area or somewhere where they're like buzzing by me, that's a different story. But we've kind of learned to coexist, and it's
They actually go to my hummingbird feeders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but they also need water, just like any other insect. So creating shallow water sources. This is why like people, if you have like a swimming pool, you commonly see wasps, bees. That is, they're going to go to the closest water source they can find, the closest clean water source. And I would rather them go to a clean water source that's been sitting out in an open dish than like a swimming pool that's full of chlorine. Now, granted, the water dish that we put in there had chlorine, but it dissipates off over time and it becomes better quality, and we're providing those extra little things.
If I wanted to put, my bird baths they're not bird baths. I mean, they are bird baths, but the birds don't bathe in them. And I have rocks in them for the bees and that kind of stuff. But if I wanted to put one in a little pollinator garden, would just a clay saucer?
That's what we have.
Okay.
We have just like a little clay pot like that.
Yeah.
And then we just glued a clay saucer
on top
of it.
So you give it some
So we just glued it on top, filled it with some different size rocks and pebbles, and then every time I'm watering, I give it a little more.
Right.
You know, it dries up, you know, but I keep it in a shady spot where it's not in full sun, so it's not evaporating. And I just keep it full as much as I can, and it's immensely helpful.
They have those little bee cups now, which I've ordered some, but you have to fill those all the time.
Yeah. I like to have something that's got a little bit of volume because I mean evaporation here
That keeps it off the ground. So
yeah. I have to clean it out a lot because we have a lot of trees, so it gets debris and stuff in there. So it's that is one downfall, but it's just like anything else. All right, find where we were. So the common mistakes that people are going to make when creating a pollinator garden is going to be, and the way they design it, it's going to be, they're not grouping things together. They're putting single plants together. I'm guilty of this right now, honestly. I don't have enough of any one given thing, but I didn't have a lot of space with what I did this year. And then also no fall blooms. It's just like gardening here. We should always have something going year round if we can. There's something that can viably produce edible produce for us year round. There's something that can bloom year round, except when we get like that little short snap of cold, freezing weather. But having something that supports year round is a common mistake. And then also overcrowding. When you go in and you plant it, don't plant it for instant gratification. I see this all the time in the world of landscaping. I'll go and I'll see people that are planting their landscapes or other landscapers, and man, it looks awesome. But when it finally grows in, it's going to be so crowded that nice look is no longer going to be there. So you need to make sure that you have proper spacing and you're leaving these plants to have the room to grow and achieve their full size so that they can thrive. Because if they're too crowded, then they're going to compete just like anything else. And if we're not providing enough inputs or resources with extra food, then they're not going to flower as much. And then we're somewhat defeating the purpose of what we're doing.
So if we did something like zinnias, which can get crowded real quick, when you go and cut some zinnias, for your house or whatever, that helps.
Yeah, you can always thin things out too.
Right.
I mean that's especially if you're using annual
Right.
type flowers. Yeah, you can plant them thick, and you can always thin them out if you need to. If they're not flowering as much, give them a little room to breathe. Um, a pollinator garden is a system. It's not just throwing things out there. I encourage you to take the time to plan it out a little bit, like research your plants before you put them in there. It's just like a prime example is milkweed. Everybody wants milkweed, but 9 times out of 10, the only thing that you can find at nurseries is tropical milkweed, and tropical milkweed is not it's not beneficial. It actually has things in there that can actually detriment your monarchs, and also it blooms too long and it can confuse insects with their life cycle, or it can make them stick around somewhere longer than they should, so they don't finish their migration, or they get caught up in weather that they normally would not be accustomed to. So finding specific varieties that are well suited for your region and that are going to actually host what you're trying to achieve. Nowadays it's so easy to find information, but take the time to research it a little bit deeper and plan it out. Start small, create a pocket, and grow with it. It doesn't all have to be in one area. That's what we like to have, different small sections at our house, like just small groupings, so that it benefits our vegetable garden and benefits everything around us. We've got berries, we've got fruits, but I want stuff all over the place. Our whole thing is kind of eclectic, but it's all done in the same concept of different shapes, sizes, and tiers, and things intermingled together.
I know one year I planted broccoli and it wasn't ready, and then it was too ready and it started blooming, and I left it, and the bees.
Oh yeah,
was unbelievable.
a lot of your vegetables, like that's what leaving broccoli. Like this year, our broccoli and cauliflower, even in the shade, didn't make a single head. Or I mean, it did, but by the time it wasn't even remotely harvestable, and then it just bolted.
All of a sudden.
So when it bolted and went to seed, we just left it for the longest time. And I did the same thing with my bok choy. Did the same thing. They were almost ready to harvest, and then all of a sudden it just shot up with seed. And it was like, now they're going to be bitter tasting. It's not going to taste good. So we just left it. Let's let something get benefit out of what we failed at. I also, one thing that I didn't cover in my slides here, I'm going to kind of go a little bit longer. If we're going to take the time to put pollinator-friendly plants out there, then we have to ensure that we're doing our best to be pesticide-free. And that's even organic pesticides. I had to spray my tomato plants the other day. It's the first time I've used something in probably 2 years. We had to use BT because the inchworm or the army worms are really, really bad this season, it seems. And I went out in 2 days, like one whole side of my tomato plant. I ain't picked the first ripe one yet. So I don't have a choice but to take action. It's the type of worm where I can't go out and just pick it. I can't get them all because there's so many of them. So we sprayed the affected plant, only the affected one, and we got it under control. But had we had pollinators or other types of caterpillars on there that fed on those leaves, then we're damaging them as well. Even your organic stuff doesn't know the difference between good or bad. So pesticides, jumping to solving a simple problem has immense benefits, and is one of the biggest reasons why a lot of people complain about not having pollinators. Chemicals, they leave residuals, they leave things behind that have long-lasting effects. They also wash off into the soil, they damage the soil ecosystem, and if the soil ecosystem isn't healthy, then the plant isn't ideally healthy. And if it's not healthy, then it can't produce viable sugars and pollens and things that the pollinators need. So when you really think about it, it's this big old vicious circle. So you've got to be careful and do your best to really think about what you're doing before you actually take action. And just like you said, like sometimes leave plants, if nothing's going in immediately afterwards, leave them in there, let them flower, let them provide some natural benefit to your surroundings.
What about yard pesticides?
Yard pesticides. I mean, you know, yard pesticides sometimes are an unnecessary evil here, especially for us that have kids. You know, if you're like me and my son, like I'm one mosquito bite and I look like a giant red whelp. And so you know, there are necessary evils, but you just got to be mindful about how you apply those things. Number one mistake with yard pesticides that could affect pollinators is wind. And it makes it very difficult here to spray most anything, while just a small slight breeze will carry microparticles all over the place. It's one of the reasons why when you really, like, if you open a label to any chemical for a lawn, like even mosquito control, it basically tells you to get into a hazmat suit to spray it, because all those things can get to you. And if they can get to us, that means they definitely can affect your pollinators. So be mindful of timing, be mindful of where you're spraying, keeping it away from areas that are edible, that are pollinator friendly. You know, it's a difficult one here just because of where we live, you know.
I just put bipin out in my yard, and like the mosquitoes and the fleas. I've started getting fleas from all the wild cats and crows.
You know, and you can mitigate drift and yard control if you're going to have to do something by using a granule. You know, a granule's not going to have that water type drift. You have to water it in, but it's pushing it down and it's dissolving from a carrier versus a liquid, which is very, very common, especially like mosquitoes. Liquids are more effective than you get that drift out there. So,
I have a question.
Sure.
I don't know if you know anything, but we apparently have armadillos that are digging holes all over our yard, and it is getting out of hand. We've tried these little stakes that go around and vibrate and like make noise. That didn't work.
Armadillos are tough. I don't have a ton of experience with them. I know like more on the outskirt areas. They're very, very common, and they'll dig holes under your house. They'll dig up everything. There are some type of other like granulated repellents like that supposedly work pretty well. I don't have any experience in them. The one that I know that I've seen people have success with, and you probably can't find it locally. It's called armadillo scram, and I think it is a natural. Most of your repellents are natural, like oil extract based, but I've seen people have success with that locally. It's just not one that is very accessible, like, you know, around here, because you just don't see many armadillo issues here. You know, you go out to like LaBelle or anywhere out, you know, where.
Right. Well, we live in Bridge City.
Yep, and out.
And kind of.
We've never had issues before, but they've been in our yard for over a year. And
it
everybody's
hasn't ever been bad.
They'll come and they'll go, but they've gotten worse. There's probably over 100 holes in our yard right now.
And you know, and just the one thing that people hate dealing with, but like trapping, you know, is, you know, trapping is pretty easy. You know, armadillos aren't the smartest, but I mean, but if you're gonna have an armadillo, you gotta have a big trap. You gotta buy one of like the sizable ones. Otherwise, it's not big enough. And especially when you're dealing with trapping with like common nuisance things like that, you need long traps, minimum 3 foot long, because things like possums, raccoons, with their tail, if it sticks out, and then when it goes to latch, all it'll hit their tail, and then if it doesn't go all the way down, they can back out. That's a real common issue. People, they downsize their trap because the trap is too expensive. They don't want to invest in it. And
We've I sprinkled some like grub killer, I guess, because
they feed for worms and other insects. So.
Yeah.
Is there an organic way to get them grubs?
Not that I know of. Grubs are when you're dealing with like grub control, like even like in a yard, they're only susceptible to like actual insecticides during one stage of life. So if you don't have your timing, I think it's like April to June. I get it mixed up with like.
So right now.
It's like there's a timing, and if you don't apply something during that time, there's
It's too late.
it's too late. I forget what I'm thinking of, that the little tunneling insect that's the same way. There's one opportunity, and it's you got to get them in a certain life stage. But most of the time, like grubs are not really detrimental unless they're in excess abundance in a small area. They're decomposers. They're in there feeding on things in the soil, so they are beneficial, but they become damaging whenever a lot of your insects that if they're too many, there's too many of them in an area, they're moving through the soil and they're disrupting root systems, and that's where you get problematic issues with those types of insects.
Is cayenne pepper okay to put in flower beds?
Yeah.
'Cause that's what we did to keep them out of the flower beds.
Yep.
But we didn't have enough for the whole yard.
Yeah, absolutely. Pepper. 'Cause essentially you're, and it's the same way with just like how I talked about how like pollinators are attracted to scents and even things that we can't smell. There are certain types of scents disrupt senses. So like the people talk about how like peppermint or mint oils disrupt rodents, and it does. They walk into an area and it's almost blinding to them. They can't. They back out because they can't function. So that happens with. That's how having a lot of these flowers and things, even in a garden, they can do the same thing. They can mask the scent of other things. You can have things that will repel other types of wildlife and insect because of the way they smell. So yeah, I mean it does. The pepper does the same way. So pepper is the way that's how you get squirrels to quit eating birdseed. Put pepper in there. Birds can't taste capsaicin or the heat, so they can eat. That's why they feed peppers are commonly found in parrot food or in a lot of types of bird food. You can find small peppers. They can't taste the heat, whereas a squirrel they can definitely. The capsaicin affects them. So yeah, you can sprinkle some in your bird feed and maybe repel them away. So what other questions we got today? No, I didn't. I actually wrote that down to mention when we're talking about herbs, if there's one thing, if you don't plant anything else pollinator related, plant flowering basils. Not your Genovese or Italian basil. Plant Thai basil, lemon basil, cinnamon basil. If you could get your hands on it, African blue basil. They will explode with pollinators. So even if you're growing just for food, they'll bring the bees. And the cool thing about your flowering basils, they're highly attractable to nighttime pollinators. So I didn't mention that earlier. Not all pollinators are daytime. So the hornworm turns into the giant sphinx moth, and that sphinx moth is the size of almost like a hummingbird, and they pollinate nighttime blooming plants. Well, basil, the blooms are still open at night. We had an African blue basil one time, and it was probably about 4 foot in diameter. And I went outside looking for something in the yard one night with a flashlight, and I just panned over it, and I mean, it was full of moths. And I was like, whoa, and at that time, I didn't even think about moths as a pollinator, but you think about caterpillars and worms, one becomes butterfly, one becomes a moth. They serve the same job, but at different times of day. So it's kind of an interesting thing. So
I got a lot of butterflies with the sponge, the loofah.
yeah,
Tons of butterflies. They were just flying in and out, and then bees with my sunflowers. That brought in a lot of stuff too.
any other questions? Cool.
Good job.
Well, appreciate it as always. Thank you guys for coming. So
Have you thought about doing a class with to build a bee house?
no, I'm always looking for new ideas though. So if there's ever something somebody has an idea, especially if it's something I know nothing about, I will learn it. Yeah. Yeah, I enjoy learning. I learn more preparing for this class than I have on a lot of the other ones, because a lot of the other ones I've done a million times. So
I'm still waiting on a composting class.
I'll make it happen.
It's okay. Don't. I got ChatGPT.
Like for composting, I really want to bring in somebody who's more suited. I would like to maybe see if I could get my friend Luis to come back from the soil company, because like soil creators are one of the best people to teach you about composting, because every bag soil that you buy started off as compost. And it's an interesting, like they're the masters of it, because they know how to create it quickly and efficiently and how to make it high quality. We did one time, like just on soil, and we talked a lot about composting. So you have to do that.
Good deal. Thank you very much.
Yeah, appreciate y'all.